before Charles' speedy recovery. And we thank you for your word. Please reach into all of us and let us absorb Proverbs and what it all has to offer and what you can teach us through it. We just thank you for everybody being here. And we ask that as we go into the sermon, that you also use Pastor Jim as a vessel to reach into all of us and also give us the guidance and the words that we need to be other vessels for other people as we go there.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. And yes, as you just said, Charles is back with us and fully recovered and doing well. And he's told me he's not going to take a dive today. He's already promised me. So we're glad to hear that. Let me start with a couple jokes and then we'll get started with our lesson today. Hank and Frank were baseball buddies. No, I told you that last week, didn't I?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Hang on. That's not the correct joke. It's not the correct file.
I told him no more. He can make grand entrances, but he can only wander in grand exits.
Is that what it is? Yeah, I agree. Okay, so here it is. I'm sorry. A man named Jack was walking along a steep cliff, and he just taking a walk, and it was a nice big mountain pass that he was on, and he accidentally got a little too close to the edge, and he fell right from the edge, and he fell on the way down. Though he luckily grabbed a branch, he was able to hold on, and which temporarily stopped his fall. And he looked down, and to his horror, he saw that he still had probably 1,000 feet fall left to drop. And so he was pretty upset, right? And so he's holding on to that branch, and he knows he can't hold on to that branch forever. So he starts yelling to anybody up above, help, anybody up there, please help. And so he does this for a few minutes. Nobody hears him, and he's about to lose his voice. He's screaming so loud, and then he hears a voice reply back, Jack, can you hear me? And he says, yeah, I hear you. Can you hear me? I'm down here. Do you see me? And the voice said, I see you, Jack. Are you all right? Well, no. Well, yeah. Well, where are you? Who are you? He said, I'm the Lord, Jack. I'm everywhere. He said, the Lord? You mean like the Lord God, Lord? Yes, that's me, Jack. And Jack said, well, oh God, please help me. I promise. If you help me get down from here and you safely help me off this mountain, I'll go back to church. I'll be a really good person. I'll serve you the rest of the days of my life. And so the Lord said, easy on the promises, Jack. Now here's what I want you to do. Listen carefully. Today was a test of your faith. I'll do anything, Lord. Just tell me anything you want me to do. Okay, Jack, let go of the branch. What? I said, let go of the branch, Lord. Trust me, the Lord said. Have faith. Let go. There was a long silence. And finally, Jack yelled, help, is there anybody else up there? Okay, so that's joke one. The other joke is a children's church. Nope, we did that one. Sorry. It's the wrong file. Let me grab the correct file. Apologize. It's right here, I think. Bear with me, it's opening. Okay, yeah, here it is. Okay. From the beginning. Back up, yep. Sorry, technical difficulties. And I thought everything was going great today. I got here early even. Always that way, right? So when Pastor Jackson over at Second Presbyterian Church got fed up with hearing all the different excuses that people were giving him for not attending church, he decided that he would offer his own list one week in the church bulletin. And so he put this in the church bulletin, 10 reasons not to wash. Number 1, I was forced to as a child. Number 2, people who wash are hypocrites. They think they're cleaner than everybody else. Number 3, there are so many different kinds of soap, I just can't decide which is best. Number 4, well, I used to wash, but I kind of got bored with it and I stopped. Number 5, I wash only on special occasions like Christmas, Easter, my birthday. Number 6, none of my friends wash. Number 7, I'll start washing when I get older and a little dirtier. Number 8, I can't spare the time to wash. Number 9, the bathroom is never warm enough in winter or cool enough in the summer. Number 10, people who make soap are only after your money. So those are our jokes for the day. So we, of course, last week as we were going through our class, we were exploring the Proverbs of 10:9 and 10:12. We really didn't focus much on 10:12. We kind of ran over with 10:9 with some of the discussion, and then of course we ended the class early. So we left out some of what I had planned for us to discuss last week. And a wonderful question was asked by Grant at the end of the class as well that I didn't get an opportunity to fully finish answering as well. So I kind of wanted to start with that, to start with answering Grant's question. But I want to answer it properly because it is a very good question that he asked and a very theologically important question for us to understand. And just to remind everybody the question, would you like to remind us or you want me to?
I don't know.
All right. So basically what Grant had asked is we were talking about integrity and how the world defines integrity different than the Bible defines integrity and the way the Lord looks at integrity. And his question effectively, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but his question effectively was, well, there are times in the Bible where we see that lies are told and those lies end up helping the Lord's cause or doing something positive. And the example that Grant gave was the case of Rahab, the prostitute, where she had lied to keep the spies safe. And he had asked, well, how do we square that with what you're talking about, with the fact that we're not to lie, that God is teaching us to not lie, yet it seems like at points in the Bible, there may be times where God is using those lies to affect some purpose for himself. And so I started into the answer and kind of begun it with the fact that, and I'll start it again today, with the fact that the Lord is very similar to like us as parents, right? You teach your children not to lie. You teach your children to do right. Yet many times they don't do what you ask, right? They do the opposite of what you've taught them. Now, does that mean that you condone their behavior? Even if it turns out good, even if whatever they've done, they've lied and it turns out for the better, and that's okay, and you're okay with that, that doesn't mean you condone the activity that led to that event, right? Now, the good thing about God is, the great thing about God, is that he sees time differently than all of us, right? He sees time, all of it at once. We see time as it comes, yet God sees all of it at once. So that means he's seen all those lies, all those wrongdoings you've already done before you ever even know you're going to do them. And yes, there are times when you're going to do wrong. All of us are going to make mistakes, each one of us, right? Nobody here is perfect. None of us are going to attain perfection until we reach heaven. So that means we're going to have, our life is going to be filled with mistakes. Now, that doesn't mean that God's going to disown us, obviously. He's told us he loves us, right? And he paid the price for those sins already. That we know, we're going to do them. He already paid for them, even the ones we haven't done. Now, again, that doesn't mean he condones them, but he has paid for them. He has died for them. And what that means is also God has sovereignty. So the world is wrapped around, what he does is make the things happen in the world so that they ultimately follow his path, his plan. Now, he doesn't necessarily use your lie. He works around your lie, right? So, and I want to use an example today to kind of teach us this, and it's ultimately an example in the Bible that I know we've all probably heard of before. Oops, let me get to it here. I'm on the wrong page. Here we go. Okay, we all know the story of Joseph, right? And he's one of the 12 sons of Jacob, or Israel as he was called. And Joseph, as we recall in the story, he was sold into slavery, right? And the best way to answer this question is talk a bit about this story of Joseph, who was the son of Jacob. And for the sake of time, I'll paraphrase a lot of the story. I'm not going to give you the whole, because it's quite a few verses. But I do want to look at a few of the verses to kind of give us an example of what, how God's providence works and how he works around the fact that we're going to make mistakes and we're going to lie. We're going to do things wrong. So let's basically look at this. You'll find the story in the book of Genesis, starting in chapters, really starts with his early life in the chapters 25 through 36, and that's when we get Joseph's father, when we get his early life. And he has a dream himself of a ladder. Remember Jacob's ladder, right? And he realizes that God is talking to him. And then later, for the story of Joseph, we begin in chapters 37 through 50 in the book of Genesis. And Joseph, to start off, he has a dream that he wants to tell his brothers about. So let's read that. Who'd like to read this for me? Or I can. Go ahead.
Then Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers. So they hated him even more. And he said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I had. Indeed, behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf rose up and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." Then his brothers said to him, "Are you really going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words.
Right. So they were jealous. He's telling them about, and sure, he probably shouldn't have told them about this dream quite so bluntly, right? But he did, and they're jealous. They're upset because he's basically saying, "I've had a dream. I'm going to rule over you." And they don't like to hear that, right? These brothers are independent. They're 12 independent brothers. Very much like you're probably your sister and brother. If your sister came to you and said, "By the way, I'm going to rule over you. I had a dream I'm going to rule over you," you probably wouldn't have liked it, right? Now, us being Christians, we're going to handle it a different way than obviously they do. And we'll get to that in a moment. So he has another dream that he now tells not only his brothers, but he also tells his brothers and his father and his mother. And so let's read that dream. Would you like to go ahead? You read the first one. Why don't you do the second one for me?
Then he had still another dream and recounted it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." And he recounted it to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers really come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the same in mind.
And that's important. Let me tell you why that's important. Because his father has had a similar dream, right? Jacob's ladder, the dream that I just mentioned a moment ago. And so he knows that sometimes these dreams are far more important than we give them credit for, right? And what this dream means, also understand, is if you are telling somebody that all of them, including mother and father, are going to bow down, the only time that would occur back in those days is if you were a king. Period, end, stop, or the king's right hand, right? You had to be a ruler to get that kind of respect, to include, because you bowed to your father. It wasn't the other way around. So this was highly unusual, this kind of dream that he was recounting to them, right? And so even his father is like, "Really? You think I'm going to be bowing down to you too?" Because that doesn't make sense, right? And yet he kept it in mind because he did know, hey, look, this might be something from God. I need to keep this in mind. I've had a similar experience. So, of course, as we mentioned, his brothers are upset, right? And they don't like this whole thought of bowing down to their brother, right? And so they're out one day. They're out taking care of the flock, right? They're shepherding the flock. And ultimately, his father tells him, "Go out to the field and check on your brothers. They've been out in the field for a while. I want you to go check on them." So Joseph goes out, and as he's coming, they see him coming. They're upset and they plot to kill him. Ultimately, they figure, "Well, look, we're not going to bow down to him. We're jealous of him. We're going to kill him." So, who'd like to read these verses for me? I'll get it. And Judah said to his brothers, "What gain is it that we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell." Well, sorry, did I skip it? Yeah, okay. So they had, said they want to kill him on his way up there, right? And then Judah said to his brother, "What gain is it that we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he's our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened. Then some Midianite traders passed by. So they pulled him up. They had thrown him in that's what I forgot. They had thrown him in a cistern or a well, right? They had planned on it. First, they were just going to murder him. And then they thought, no, we'll just throw him in this well. So the blood's not on our hands. He'll just die, but, the blood won't be on our hands, which is really kind of not real. It's still blood on their hands, even if he dies. But they were kind of, making light of it and trying to figure out a way that they could kill him without taking responsibility. We do that ourselves a lot, right? We sin and trying to figure out a way not to have to take responsibility for it. And so ultimately, while this is happening and he's in that well, they go eat lunch, right? Because no big deal, we're going to kill our brother, let's have lunch. Because again, this is the wicked spirit that was within them at this point in time. They were prideful. They had no thought of being able to bow down to anyone. As we many times have the same kind of prideful thought. I'm not going to be, humble to anyone. It's me, right? You should respect me, not the other way around. And so they plot to kill him, and then they go have lunch. Well, while they're having lunch is when Judah says all this to his brothers. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him. Then the blood's not on our hands. He's still away from us. We don't have to bow down to him. We'll sell him as a slave. We'll make money off of him all at the same time. And so they all agree. Instead of killing him, that's what they'll do. And then the next thing that occurs is he's, of course, sold. And they take him to Egypt. They take him with these Midianites, Ishmaelites, Midianites. They were traders, and they had a caravan that passed by that particular area. They were in Dothan. They were supposed to be in Shechem, but instead of going to Shechem, they ended up in Dothan with these sheep. And there was a trade route, a caravan trade route that would go through here that would take spices and myrrh and different spices for perfumes as well as for burial to Egypt and slaves. And so when they saw this caravan coming by, that first one is when Judah said, let's not kill him, let's sell him. So then another caravan comes by, and they sell him to that second caravan that comes by. Well, that one takes him to Egypt. And these Midianites were nomadic traders. They were shepherds. They were a tribe of people descended from the fourth son of Abraham by his wife Keturah, and his name was Midian, and he was like the first son, so he was the most important son. And they were a branch of Arabians dwelling primarily in the desert north of Arabia, right? Egypt, right? And they traded, like I said, in spices, perfumes, and all that. And so ultimately, they sell him to these particular traders who then take him to Egypt. Now, before we talk about the next part of this, when was there a time that someone meant something for evil towards you that God meant for good? Can you think back of a time where something like this happened where, well, we haven't gotten to the good part yet, we will, but where somebody did something to you that turned out for the better, where they tried to do something wrong to you and God then turned it around to make it right for you? Anybody got an example? I've got several. Go ahead.
One of the most prevalent that I can think of is when we first were trying to see Cheyenne. We were just looking to have visitation with her, and had found them and had gotten really good quote and everything. And all we wanted was just, every other week just to be a part of her life.
Right.
And her mom and her mom's mom decided that they wanted to tell a god-awful lie.
Right.
Make it basically so we couldn't be a part of her life, but also so it would ruin our lives.
Sure.
And it backfired, and that's when Cheyenne was taken out of her custody and put in our custody temporarily, and then it came permanent.
Right. Right.
And that's one of the most prevalent.
Sure. So what she meant for evil, God meant for good. And that's a very good example of this story that we're talking about here. We're going to continue with it. But and it's an example of God's providence, right? There are going to be times where even it's not you that does the evil, it's someone around you that does the evil or the sin, right? However you want to term it. And then God will, in his providence, work it to where it doesn't harm you, but it helps you instead. Because God wants what's for good for us, right? He doesn't want what's for evil, yes?
I'll give you another one.
Sure.
Cheyenne man jumped out of her bedroom window one time, ran across the neighborhood, got the cops involved, tried to get us thrown under the bus. Didn't work.
Sure.
We ended up we had to go to this program, and we thought it was going to be a real pain. But it was. We enjoyed it.
Right.
We ended up getting 2 free tablets out of it.
Right.
Other stuff.
Right.
$1,000 worth of gift cards.
Wow.
I mean, just
And you learned from it too, probably. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
unreal.
Yeah. So once again, there are many times, I'm sure each of us has a story, at least one, where they can think back to an instance where someone meant something evil for you or negative for you, and God turned it to a positive for you. I know I have several, so I'm sure everybody has at least one. And the more you think about it, probably the more you can come up with. And I bet if you really look at it, you can come up with a lot, because your life is filled with that if you're a Christian, or it will be, because you're gonna have people persecute you constantly. That's part of the deal, as they say. So ultimately, these are things that the same thing was going on with Joseph. So let's continue on with the story. And so at this point, right, these Midianite traders take Joseph to Egypt, as we mentioned. And ultimately, what they don't realize is this particular caravan, again, was selling slaves, and they sell him to the captain of the guard of the Pharaoh of Egypt, right? So it happens to be one of the most powerful men in Egypt that Jacob gets sold to, or Joseph, I should say, gets sold to. Now, of course, his brothers didn't plan this, right? Nobody could have known this except for who? God, right? So let's read here what happens next. He's in, now he's there as a slave in Egypt. Who'd like to read the next few verses for me? Yeah, go ahead.
The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had.
Awesome. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us he was in charge of everything except what this man ate. That's a lot, right? And again, this was the captain of the guard for the Pharaoh of Egypt. The Pharaoh of Egypt is the king, right? He's in charge. And so if you're going to be sold as a slave, this is the guy you want to be sold to, right? Because he's not whipping his slaves. He's not putting them in hard labor. He is, utilizing them for these purposes, to run his house. And Joseph, of course, he notices the blessing that God has placed upon him, that he's a blessed man. And so, he decides, hey, this guy's blessed by God. I want him running everything, right? Because his blessing will then pass on to be my blessing. And it does. The Bible tells us that ultimately this man's house was blessed just as much as Joseph was, because he had placed Joseph in that position. So let's move to the next part of the story here. Ultimately, as he's in this house, right, again, here it says, but Yahweh was with Joseph and extended loving kindness to him and gave him favor in sight of the chief jailer. We'll get to that. Ultimately, while he's in the house with this captain of the guard, his wife starts to flirt with him, right? The Bible tells us he's attractive. He's an attractive man. And so she starts to flirt with him. And ultimately, he's running into someone who intends evil for him. Some would say this woman exhibits the spirit of Jezebel, and that's a whole nother lesson that we talk about in the future. But the woman that I'm talking about here is Potiphar's wife, and this is who had him as his slave. And so Potiphar's wife is kind of enthralled with Joseph, and every day she asks him to sleep with her, and he says, "No, I can't. Your husband is my boss, my owner, my master." And he's put everything in my hands, except I know you're not part of that deal. Because I know it's not just that. God would would find that wrong. And so I can't do it, not just because I know it's wrong for, Potiphar. He would be upset with me, but it's wrong in the eyes of God. And he most certainly calls that out. And that's important too, because it shows you that his primary concern here is God's feelings, God's wants, God's needs, God's will. Which again is why he's blessed, right? But this woman gets upset, right? And she's very upset he won't sleep with her, right? She's probably attractive, and probably upset that he's not he's shunning her, right? And she's not gaining his affection. And so she decides, just like the spirit of Jezebel, just like Jezebel did, she decided that she would take matters into her own hands. And one day while he's coming in to do some work in the house and nobody is around, she grabs his tunic, right? And he goes to pull away because he ain't having none of that. And she pulls it off of him. And ultimately now has his clothing in her hands. And he runs off, right? Because he's like, no, I'm not getting caught with you with my clothes, right? In your hands. I'm not getting caught with you that close to me. And so he runs off. And unfortunately, she keeps his clothing in her hands. And then she claims effectively that he tried to force himself upon her. And so Potiphar obviously is going to listen to his wife. She's got his clothes in his hand, right? And so he throws him in jail, throws Joseph in jail. Now, while Joseph is in jail, it just so happens, right? Look at all these coincidences that the world would tell you are luck, right? Just like the joke we began with, right? All coincidences and luck, right? So anyway, the next coincidence in luck is while he's in jail, of course the chief jailer realizes this guy's blessed, and that's the next verses we're going to read here. But Yahweh was with Joseph and extended loving kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. So guess what the chief jailer does? He puts him in charge of everything too, just like Potiphar did. And so he's like what we might call a trustee in our modern day jail, right? Where he's able to walk around, he's not really held in a cell, and he helps the jailer do all the work, feeds the inmates, all that kind of stuff. Well, one day, again, by luck, happens to be the baker and the cupbearer, do something that angers ultimately the Pharaoh, right? He's mad at him. And the Bible doesn't tell us what they do, and it doesn't matter. But whatever caused that offense, and I know it caused it, but whatever caused that offense put them in jail for a time, right? And ultimately, the cupbearer then has a dream. And he's kind of stressed because he doesn't understand his dream. And he's upset, right? And ultimately, he says, look, I need somebody to help me figure out this dream. So Joseph comes to him and says, what's wrong? I see you're upset. And he tells him his dream, and Joseph interprets the dream for him and tells him, look, what that dream means is in 3 days you're going to be put back as cupbearer. Pharaoh's going to take you back from jail, and he's going to forgive you of what you've done, and you're going to be cupbearer. Well, the baker, he hears all this, and he thinks, well, that's great. This guy just heard good things. I want to hear what's my dream, right? I had a dream last night too. And so he tells Joseph his dream. And he says, well, unfortunately in your case, not quite the same thing. It means in 3 days you're going to lose your head, and he's going to hang you, and you're going to be put for the birds to eat, right? So not such good news for him. But ultimately Joseph says to the cupbearer, when you all go back to the kingdom, please remember me and tell Pharaoh, because he's going to bring you back into his service. Tell him I'm here and I'm innocent. I didn't do anything wrong. And I should be freed. As a matter of fact, I was sold into slavery, and all this is wrong in the first place, right? And so the cupbearer says, I will. But how many times do we do that, right? I'll pray for you. And then we don't, right? And he doesn't. He goes back. He's thinking more about himself. And he goes back into the service of the Pharaoh. And for 2 years, he forgets all about this interaction he just had with Joseph, who told him these great things that were going to happen in his life from his dream. And ultimately, the cupbearer then, Pharaoh, has a dream himself. One that's got him perplexed. He calls in all his, his wizards and all his people to try and, figure out what his dream's all about. And none of them can tell him anything. They're all, they're flummoxed. They have no idea, right? They're not God. And so ultimately, the cupbearer says, listen, I remember a guy that I know is touched by God. He's blessed by God. I saw it. And he also interpreted my dream, and exactly what he said happened. You need to talk to him, Pharaoh. And of course, cupbearer is somebody that the Pharaoh trusts, right? This is the man that drinks his wine every day to make sure he don't die. So he probably trusts this guy pretty much, right? So of course, he takes the cupbearer's advice. He brings Joseph in. Joseph interprets the dream. And ultimately, Joseph tells Pharaoh what's going to happen, that there's going to be 7 years of famine. Well, first, there's going to be 7 years of great abundance. And then after that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And unfortunately, the famine's going to be so bad that it totally obliterates the abundance. And they need to prepare. He says, you need to prepare for this. You need to put away at least a fifth of the abundance, 20% of the abundance, and probably more than that, so that you can be prepared for the blight that comes. And so Pharaoh says, look, that's a great idea. You're in charge. Right? Everybody keeps putting him in charge. Wonder why that is. Any ideas? So, ultimately, Pharaoh tells him this next set of verses. Who'd like to read this for me? Yeah.
Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt.
Effectively, he's telling him, I'm giving you the power of Pharaoh. The only person that can tell anything other than you is me. So he made him a king. He gave him equal power to himself. See how this dream now starting to make more sense? Men will bow before him now. All men will bow before him now. He's a king, effectively, by the decree of Pharaoh. And ultimately, at this point, everything that he says is going to happen happens. So all the people in the land have to come bow down to him for food when the famine comes, right? And they do. And ultimately, Joseph's brothers now in Israel, in Canaan, the land of Canaan, they're there with their father, his father Jacob, and the blight is everywhere. It's not just in Egypt; it's everywhere. And everyone's experiencing the famine. The problem is nobody else is aware of this, right? They don't have Joseph's counsel. So they didn't prepare like Egypt did. And so the rest of the world now starts going to Egypt for food, including Joseph's brothers, right? The ones that sold him into slavery. They are hungry. And their father says, look, I hear that there's food in Egypt. You need to go to Egypt and get food. And they do. And ultimately, when they go to Egypt to get food, who'd like to read this? Thank you.
Now Joseph was the one in power over the land. He was the one who sold to all the poor of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground.
Exactly what he said would happen in his dream. Exactly. So the prophetic dream that he had is now fulfilled by that verse. And ultimately, these young men, to make a long story short, because it is kind of a long story, and I'm sorry I've taken this long with it, but it's important that we understand this. It's a very important theological principle behind all this. And ultimately, again, to try and make this short, what happens is these brothers don't realize that's their brother. When they come and bow down before him, the Bible tells us he disguises himself, right? And he speaks in Hebrew, or not in Hebrew, but in Egyptian to them instead of Hebrew, and uses a translator, right? He speaks Hebrew, but he acts like he doesn't, right? And ultimately, so they don't recognize him. They don't realize who he is. They don't realize that's the brother they sold into slavery 20-some years ago, or however long. I can't remember now. Sorry. It's at least 14. But ultimately, they don't remember, or realize, I should say, they don't realize who he is. And so they bow down before him and ask for food. Well, he gives them the food they ask for. They come with, silver to buy it. Not only does he give them food that they ask for, he also puts the silver back in their bags without them knowing. And they leave, right? And guys, the purpose behind all these things, it's something that maybe we can study again in the future. These are different tests that he puts his brothers through, directed by God, to see if they're truly the brothers that put him in slavery or they've changed. If they truly repented of these sins that they've already committed, right? Or not. If they are the same brothers that left him in that well and then sold him into slavery or not. So God puts them through a series of tests through their brother Joseph to see, are you truly repentant of your sins? Are you the same men that you were, or have you changed truly? Are you truly what we would call a Christian now, right? Of course, they weren't Christians then. But have you changed? Are you repentant of your sins? And so ultimately, they passed the tests effectively. You should read the story yourself again, or we should do the whole lesson of it. And ultimately, he then reveals himself that I am Joseph, I'm your brother, right? And he cries, gets upset, and has an emotional time with them, and asks them to bring his father finally to the land, so that they can all live and be saved and not die from this blight that's happening, right? Because they're going to die if they don't have food, obviously. So he saves them from all this, and they come to the land. And ultimately, the big thing that I want to tell you here, let's read this. I'll read it, it's kind of long. Then Joseph's brothers saw their father was, so after all this happens, their father dies, right? And they still think that Joseph's going to hold a grudge against them. Even though he's told them, he's done all these things for them, come to the land, I'm going to take care of you, I'm giving you your own land, I'm setting you up with Pharaoh, bring dad, the whole thing, right? He's done all this. He's done everything he can to show them kindness and love and everything else. But they're afraid. They figure he's just waiting for the perfect time to kill them because they tried to effectively sell him to slavery and kill him, right? And of course, then their father dies. And let's read this. I'll read it. Then Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, and they said, What if Joseph bears a grudge against us and returns back to us all the evil which we dealt against him? So they sent a message to Joseph saying, Your father commanded before he died, and of course they're lying, your father commanded before he died, saying, Thus you shall say to Joseph, Please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they dealt evil against you. So now, please forgive the transgression of the slaves of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Behold, we're your slaves. But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? Meaning, am I the one that's supposed to judge you? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to do what has happened on this day, to keep many people alive. So now, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke to their heart. Again, the lesson that we need to see from all of this, none of this is accident. All of this was directed by God. Every moment of your life is just like every moment of Joseph's life. There are going to be times you fail. There are going to be times you sin. There are going to be times you make mistakes. And there are going to be times people around you mean things for evil against you. And yet, when you are in God's hand, he tells us no one can pluck you out of my hand. No one. And I believe what he says. Because so far, everything he's told me has occurred. Everything. Including all we just saw happen here that was foretold and then occurred. Things that were just unheard of. Father bowing down to son. Right? And so ultimately, to answer Grant's question, we answer it with the fact that theologically, the Lord works through the providence of that miracle of providence, right? Everything in your life, my life, all of our lives are all intertwined. And because God can see time differently than we do, he sees it all at once. He's in control of everything. He knows what nudge he needs to do here, what thought he needs to give you, what wicked thing you're going to do tomorrow, so that all of it ultimately works to his plan. All of it. And we should understand that is the greatest miracle other than salvation that each one of us will ever experience. And all of us experience it every single day. It's a miracle you should thank God for every single day. Because it's a beautiful miracle. Probably, I think it's awesome. Yes?
Well, because he can see your life in a blink of an eye.
Yes.
From beginning to end.
Right.
He knows how it's going to start. He knows you're going to lie.
Right.
He knows you're going to lie, and he already got a plan.
Yes.
Just like he did here, he already had a plan in place to cover for your life or to shape it the way he wants it to be.
Right.
I mean, he already knows the decisions that you're going to make, how many times you're going to let him down.
Right.
How many times you're going to lift him up.
Right.
He already knows that.
Right.
We can't see that. We can't see the end of the situation. I mean, a lot of times in me and Kelly's life, I was like, we don't think we're going to get through this, but we get through it better than we were before. But we couldn't see it as we were in that circumstance.
Sure.
That's where faith comes in. We rely on God, that God's got the best plan for my life.
Yes.
And those around me to steer this in the right direction. He always does.
Yes.
He always does. It's always better. It's always better when we come through these situations. And over the years, God. You got this.
You bet.
You got this. We're going to trust in you. And I know you want to see us through this. It might not be easy. It might be rough.
Right.
You know, might go through a lot. I know when I get through this, then I'm going to be closer to you.
Yes. And more like you.
Yes, we find it.
And that's what he did with Joseph.
Yes, exactly.
Joseph
And his brothers.
Joseph went through hell.
Yes.
You know, he was beaten, he's tortured. I mean, and God always placed him, you know, put him in a situation where he could excel.
Right.
Not because Joseph was strong, it's because God was strong.
Exactly.
And God used his willingness, his abilities, his relying on God, you know, for all his strength, that he used Joseph in all these situations, and I mean through it made Egypt better.
Yes. Well, something else I want you to think about, again, this providence of the Lord. Understand that the next book of the Bible is Exodus, right? So all this had to happen. All of it. The Israelite people had to be in Egypt. Had to be. Or we don't get the next book of the Bible, right? It was really that. I mean, I'm making it kind of silly there, but that's the point. So God ultimately made all this occur through working what some meant for evil, God meant for good. God worked out the plan that he had in mind through us, right? And through our failings. Not just through our successes, but through our failings. And that's what's beautiful about God, is no matter what we do, God's will happen. Yes. And what we should be looking for at every point in our life is, how does this further God's will? How does this further God's plan? And if you do that, just what you just said a moment ago, you're going to find that your life is a lot more, it makes more sense. It's a lot easier, right? Because then you're not buying into the lie that Satan wants to tell you, and that is, it's all under, this is chaos. Your life is shambles, and you're never going to be, none of this is going to work out, and you need to be afraid. That's Satan talking. That ain't God talking, because God's got you. Yes.
Makes me think of two things. One, it builds faith for those
Yes.
who do believe. And then it also reminds those who do evil that God is still in charge.
Yes.
And your evil didn't work.
Yes. Many of the Proverbs we've already learned have taught us that there is a natural consequence to those who mean for evil, right? For sin, right? And yeah, absolutely right. And also, guess what? It serves to show the power of God. That's the whole point of the book of Exodus.
Builds the kingdom.
Yes. Is to show the power of God and to show the whole world the power of God, right? Not just the Israelite people, but the whole world. Because at that time, Egypt was the whole world for all effect, right? It was the biggest kingdom, so to speak, at the time. So God's plan is always in action, always going to happen, always working, right? And as Brian said, it's something that we can take solace in, we can take comfort in, to know that everything happening in your life, there's a reason behind it. And if you look for that reason and that meaning, and how can I grow as a Christian, how can I become closer to God or more like God, then you'll find that all those things that are hard to deal with get easier to deal with. They become more, less harmful to you, less scary to you, right? So I know I took a long time to answer that question, but we needed to, right? It's a very important theological question. I'm glad you asked it, Grant.
How I got sidetracked, but go ahead.
Yeah. No, it was an awesome question. So I'm glad you asked it last class, and we were able to cover it in full. So again, we're God's children. So understand, you're going to make mistakes. But just like your children, you're not going to disown them when they mess up, right? You're going to try and teach them the right thing instead. You're going to talk to them, tell them what they've done wrong. God will do the same with us. He chastens us, right? He corrects us and asks us to do the right thing. Now, if we don't do the right thing, he'll work around it because he's God. He already knows you did it before you did it, right? When I say he works around it, that's not really the best way of seeing it. He already saw it. It already happened. He already planned for it. It doesn't matter. right? His plan's going to happen either way. So let's move on to, now that we've kind of covered that question, and we're really kind of running out of time now. But let's run on to the next section of what we were working on last week. We were talking about righteousness and integrity, right? And ultimately, we were talking about Proverbs 10:9 and 10:12. And we still have some related verses that I want us to discuss today that are quite important. And we left off really covering most of 10:9. And so where we're at now is really Proverbs 10:12 and the study of it and its related verses. Who'd like to read this for me? We're not going to finish this today. We'll try and get as much through it as we can, but we'll finish it up next week. Who'd like to read this for me? Yes.
Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses.
Awesome. This is really concise, but it's pretty profound. And again, a very theologically important thing for us to understand. Hatred in of itself breeds hatred. Anger breeds anger. The last time you got in a fight and an argument with your spouse, right? And I know you've all done it. Don't tell me you haven't, right? I was married too. And the last time that happened, when you raised your voice, what'd she do? Raised hers. So anger, hatred, anger, all that stirs more hatred and more anger. But love covers all offenses, right? So if you come into that argument with a loving attitude instead, what you're going to find is it diffuses it. The argument goes away. Because how can you argue with somebody that is being loving to you? I can't. If my wife was being loving to me and I was being a jerk, I'd feel like 10 times more a jerk, right? And so we should strive to have that love in our heart, especially when we're dealing with those situations where we're in a conflict, right? And that's ultimately what this proverb is trying to get across. And it kind of underscores the Christian doctrine that love is a powerful force for good. And it overcomes, all kinds of sins and conflicts and things that might happen in your life. And it really aligns with the New Testament teaching where we see that love is seen as the greatest of all virtues, right? We see in 1 Corinthians 13:13 that it tells us it's a fundamental expression of God's nature. So love is part of who God is, right? God is love. I know you've heard that before. And that tells you that it's one of his fundamental pieces of who he is. And so we should strive for it to be a fundamental piece of who we are, right? You should strive to have love in your heart in every situation. Not just when it's convenient, not just when it's good, when it's easy, or when it makes sense, or when it when it gains you something. Love should be there even when it's hard, even when you don't want to be nice, right? Because I know there are times we get upset, we get angry, somebody's being rude to us, and instead of returning love, we return the same either coldness or rudeness, and we shouldn't. Love thy enemy, right? We should return it with love. Yes.
I mean, God tells us to love our enemies, and there's times that people go through things. I remember counseling with a fellow that family member abused his child, and he was like, "How do I forgive him? How do I forgive him because he hurt my child?" He said, "I can never." I said, "Until you can get past this, this is going to tear you apart.
Burn you up.
This is going to eat you up. It's going to eat your life up. Until you can forgive him and get past this, doesn't mean you got to forget.
Sure.
But you have to get through this yourself."
Sure. And that's great advice that you gave him. And it's biblically correct, right? In that if we can't forgive our neighbor, how can we expect God to forgive us?
Right.
Because sure, look, abusing a child is a bad thing, right? But God considers every sin a bad thing. And all of us have fallen short. All of us have sinned. And it's not our place to judge my sin versus your sin. I can't say my sins are less than your sins, because it's not my place to do. There's only one person who's judged, and it's not us. Now, again, as you said, don't forget, don't put your child back in that situation.
Right.
But yes, you have to forgive, or it will eat you up.
God
Yes.
says guilty of one, guilty of all. I mean,
Exactly.
All those.
Exactly. So that means all of us are just as guilty. Exactly. Yes.
I think the hardest thing about forgiveness is that most of us, initially, before we get, understanding of the Lord and the Word, we think of it as absolution or, absolving them of their
Right.
crime or their hurt against us, and that's not what it's about.
Right.
Forgiveness, I think, is created for us individually because the Lord knows, God knows how it tears us apart, how it depletes our soul, how it
Sure.
just makes us poisoned on the inside.
Sure.
Because we have that bitterness and that unforgiveness. Now that's what's going to be pouring out of us towards other people, even if it's not towards that person.
Right.
We're going to be less loving to the next person,
Sure.
less trusting, and less open, and less kind because of these things. And
Yes.
so I think people need to realize, me included, need to realize that forgiveness has nothing to do with that person that has done to them. That's your healing
Sure.
for yourself.
Absolutely.
So you can continue on the walk that you have with God.
Absolutely. And something you just said is very important. And it's again, we're not the judge. So you forgiving them does not absolve them of the sin. You're not forgiving their sin. You can't forgive sins.
Yeah.
We're not God. Right? But you can forgive them for yourself, as you just said. God will judge them. I promise you they will stand before him for that sin. They will answer. And if they have never repented of it, they'll go to hell for it. Bottom line. But that's not for you to do. That's not for you to worry about. It's not for you to think about. That's God's job. And I'll give you a good example. David was running from his son Absalom, was trying to steal his kingdom, right? That's pretty rough when your own son's trying to steal your kingdom, right? And as he's going, he's trying to hide from Absalom effectively, from his son, running from the kingdom. Some man on the road starts throwing stones at him. At David, King David, throwing stones at him, calling him names. And so his people say, hey, I'll go take his head off for you. And David says, no, don't do that. If God is allowing this man to throw stones at me, God wants it to happen. So you let it happen. It's not my place to judge this man, it's God's. And hopefully God will see this evil this man has done to me, and he will repay me in good for it. The same principle we just looked at with Jacob, right? Or Joseph, I should say. So it's the same thing, right? You have to forgive and let God be the judge of it all, and let God give you that benefit for your forgiveness. God will reward you for forgiving, just like he's going to hold them accountable for their sin, and you for yours. Yes, we're out of time. We'll finish everything up. We'll probably not cover a whole lot more of this, and we'll move on to the next section. But I do have a couple more related verses for next week. Awesome class, guys. Thank you so much. Such wonderful discussion that we have every week. And great, again, thank you, Grant, for the questions. Guys, questions like that, always ask. Don't feel like you're interrupting anything with the class. Don't feel like you're throwing us in a tangent. That's great. Sometimes those tangents turn out to be a whole other class, obviously, right? So do it. That's great. Who'd like to say a prayer for me and we'll end our class? Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for the fact that, Lord, things that happen to us by people that are trying to do wicked things to us, Lord, that you turn it for good, you turn it for something that glorifies you, Lord. Thank you for that, and I thank you for the fact that we can turn to you and ask for these gifts, and I know that we're going to receive them, Lord. I pray, Lord, right now that the message that we're going to receive from the service, Lord, that we would learn more about you, study your word a little harder, Lord, that we become a little stronger and stronger in our faith, Lord. I thank you for the blessing you bestowed on us with that, Lord. I ask now that if there's anyone there at the service this afternoon that they don't know you, Lord, that they will be the day that they come to call you their Lord and Savior. I thank you for these things and ask all these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, guys. Have a great week. God bless everybody. Love y'all. Be safe. And again, don't forget the website, charlesnetterville.com. You'll be able to get all the lessons there. Thank you, my dear. God bless. Be safe. Take it easy. See y'all later.
I don't mean to